Step out of the vehicle, now.
Officer, I provided my license. What is the reason for this stop?
I said step out. Don't argue with me.
I'm not resisting. I'm asking a lawful question.
Hands on the hood. Do it.
I do not consent to any searches.
You don't decide that.
The blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror at exactly 2:17 inches the afternoon on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Judge Barbara Taylor had just finished lunch with her colleagues and was driving back to the courthouse when Officer Marcus Wright decided to pull her over. What happened next would expose a corrupt cop, destroy a career built on abuse of power, and result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in state history. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button because this case will absolutely blow your mind with how it unfolds. Judge Barbara Taylor had spent 15 years on the federal bench. She was respected, accomplished, and known for her fair but firm approach to justice. At 52 years old, she had presided over thousands of cases, from corporate fraud to violent crimes. She drove a modest sedan, lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and had never so much as received a speeding ticket in her entire adult life. That Tuesday afternoon, she was wearing her usual professional attire under her judicial robe, which she had removed after court ended for lunch break. Nothing about her driving was erratic or suspicious. She was traveling 5 miles under the speed limit, using her turn signals, and following all traffic laws. But none of that mattered to Officer Wright. Wright had been with the police department for 8 years. On paper, he looked like a decent cop with commendations and positive performance reviews. But what his supervisors didn't know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that Wright had developed a troubling pattern of targeting successful black professionals. He seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating people who had achieved more than he ever would. When Wright spotted Judge Taylor driving her sedan through downtown, something triggered his predatory instincts. Maybe it was her confident posture, her professional appearance, or simply the fact that she was a black woman who looked successful. Whatever the reason, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The traffic stop began normally enough. Wright approached her driver's side window with his hand resting on his weapon, which immediately struck Judge Taylor as aggressive and unnecessary. She had dealt with enough criminal cases to recognize when an officer was looking for trouble rather than simply doing their job. Wright asked for her license and registration without explaining why he had stopped her. Judge Taylor calmly provided both documents while asking what violation she had committed. Wright ignored her question and walked back to his patrol car, leaving her sitting there for nearly 20 minutes. During those 20 minutes, Wright ran her information through every database he could access. He was looking for anything, any excuse to escalate the situation. Outstanding warrants, unpaid tickets, suspended license, anything that would give him leverage over this woman who clearly thought she was better than him. But Judge Taylor's record was spotless. No warrants, no unpaid fines, no traffic violations, nothing. Her license was current, her registration was valid, and her insurance was up to date. Wright was frustrated, but he wasn't ready to give up. When he returned to her car, his demeanor had changed. He was more aggressive, more confrontational. He told her to step out of the vehicle. Judge Taylor asked why, stating that she had provided all requested documents and had committed no traffic violations. Wright raised his voice and repeated his command. Judge Taylor complied, but she also did something that would prove crucial later. She activated the voice recorder on her phone, which was still sitting in her car's cup holder. Everything that happened next was captured in crystal clear audio. Wright ordered her to place her hands on the hood of her car. Judge Taylor asked again what violation had prompted this stop. Wright told her to shut up and do what she was told. His language became increasingly aggressive and inappropriate for a professional traffic stop. Then, Wright made his first major mistake. He began searching her purse without consent or probable cause. Judge Taylor clearly stated that she did not consent to any searches and asked to see a warrant. Wright laughed and said he didn't need her permission or a warrant. As he rifled through her belongings, Wright found her judicial identification card. Most officers would have immediately realized their mistake and apologized profusely. Not Wright. Instead, he accused her of having a fake ID and claimed she was impersonating a federal judge. Judge Taylor calmly explained that she was indeed a sitting federal judge and suggested he contact the courthouse to verify her identity. Wright's response revealed everything about his character and motivations. He said he didn't care if she was the President of the United States. She was going to learn some respect. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever witnessed police misconduct firsthand? Type yes in the comments if you have. Wright handcuffed Judge Taylor and placed her in the back of his patrol car. She remained calm and professional, even as her constitutional rights were being violated in broad daylight. She asked to speak with his supervisor and was told to shut her mouth. What Wright didn't realize was that Judge Taylor had an eidetic memory for legal procedures and constitutional law. Every illegal action he took, every violation of her rights, every inappropriate comment was being cataloged in her mind for the lawsuit she was already planning. The arrest was completely baseless. Wright claimed she was driving erratically, but the dash cam footage would later prove this was a lie. He claimed she was belligerent and uncooperative, but the audio recording proved she had been polite and compliant throughout the encounter. He claimed she had resisted arrest, but there were witnesses who saw the entire incident and would testify that she never resisted anything. Wright transported Judge Taylor to the county jail, where the booking process became even more humiliating. He told the intake officers that she was a career criminal who had been impersonating a federal judge. He suggested they process her for identity theft and fraud charges in addition to the traffic violations he had fabricated. The intake officers, who were actually competent at their jobs, immediately recognized that something was wrong. They had processed enough real criminals to know that Judge Taylor didn't fit the profile. Her demeanor, her speech patterns, her knowledge of legal procedures, everything about her suggested she was exactly who she claimed to be. One of the intake officers quietly contacted the federal courthouse while Wright was filling out paperwork. Within 30 minutes, the courthouse confirmed that Judge Barbara Taylor was indeed a sitting federal judge and that she was expected back in court that afternoon for a sentencing hearing. The jail supervisor, a veteran officer with 25 years of experience, immediately understood the magnitude of the situation. A police officer had illegally arrested a federal judge based on fabricated charges. This wasn't just misconduct, it was career suicide for everyone involved. The supervisor tried to handle the situation quietly. He approached Wright and suggested they release Judge Taylor immediately and forget the whole thing happened. Wright, who was either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant, refused. He insisted that she was a criminal and demanded they process her fully. That's when the supervisor made the call that would end Wright's career. He contacted the police chief, the district attorney, and the FBI field office. Within an hour, the jail was swarming with investigators, internal affairs officers, and federal agents. Judge Taylor was released immediately, with profuse apologies from everyone except Wright, who continued to insist he had done nothing wrong. She was offered medical attention, counseling services, and anything else she might need. She politely declined and asked for copies of all reports and recordings related to her arrest. What happened next would make Wright wish he had chosen a different profession entirely. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation within hours. The police department launched an internal affairs investigation. The district attorney's office began reviewing every case Wright had ever been involved in, and Judge Taylor retained the best civil rights attorney in the state. The evidence against Wright was overwhelming. The dash cam footage showed Judge Taylor driving normally and complying with all traffic laws. The audio recording captured every illegal action and inappropriate comment. Multiple witnesses confirmed that she had been cooperative and professional throughout the encounter, but the investigation revealed something even more damaging. Wright had a pattern of targeting successful black professionals. Over the past 3 years, he had made dozens of questionable arrests, almost all involving black doctors, lawyers, business owners, and other professionals. The police department's own records showed that Wright arrested black drivers at a rate 5 times higher than white drivers, despite working the same neighborhoods and shifts as his colleagues. His arrest reports were frequently inaccurate or completely fabricated. Complaints against him had been ignored or dismissed without proper investigation. Internal Affairs discovered that Wright had bragged to other officers about putting uppity people in their place. He had made racist comments in the locker room and had even kept a personal scorecard of how many suits he had humiliated. The more investigators dug, the worse it got for Wright and the entire police department. They found evidence of supervisors covering up complaints, evidence of discriminatory policies, and evidence of a culture that not only tolerated racism, but actively encouraged it. Judge Taylor case became the centerpiece of a federal civil rights investigation that would ultimately lead to a consent decree requiring the entire police department to undergo federal oversight for the next decade. But Wright's nightmare was just beginning. The arrest of a federal judge had attracted national media attention, and his face was plastered across every news outlet in the country. Civil rights attorneys from across the nation began calling Judge Taylor, offering their services pro bono. She chose Angelique Martinez, a legendary litigator who had won over $200 million in settlements from police departments nationwide. Martinez was known for her ruthless cross-examinations and her ability to expose systemic corruption in law enforcement agencies. The lawsuit filed 3 months later was a masterpiece of legal strategy. It didn't just target Wright for his illegal actions. It went after the entire police department for creating and maintaining a culture of racial discrimination. It named Wright, his supervisor, the police chief, and the city as defendants. The complaint detailed Wright's pattern of targeting successful black professionals with surgical precision. Martinez had interviewed 43 people who had been illegally stopped, searched, or arrested by Wright over the past 5 years. The stories were remarkably similar. Professional black men and women driving through downtown areas, pulled over for fabricated violations, subjected to humiliating searches, and often arrested on bogus charges that were later dropped. Dr. Michael Stevens, a prominent surgeon, described how Wright had pulled him over while he was rushing to perform emergency surgery. Wright had forced him to stand in the rain for over an hour while he searched his BMW, causing Dr. Stevens to miss the surgery and potentially costing a patient their life. Attorney Sarah Johnson recounted how Wright had arrested her in front of her children after she questioned why he was searching her vehicle during a routine traffic stop. She spent 6 hours in jail before the charges were mysteriously dropped. Business owner David Chen told how Wright had handcuffed him outside his own restaurant, claiming he looked suspicious walking around the building. Chen had been checking on his property after hours, something he did every night for 15 years. The pattern was undeniable, and Martinez used it to build an ironclad case against not just Wright, but the entire system that had protected and enabled him for years. Wright's legal defense was a disaster from the beginning. His attorney tried to argue that he had been following proper police procedures and that Judge Taylor had been uncooperative. This strategy fell apart within minutes when Martinez played the audio recording of the entire encounter. The jury heard Wright's voice clearly stating that he didn't care if she was the President of the United States. They heard him searching her belongings without consent. They heard him making inappropriate comments about putting her in her place. They heard him fabricating charges and lying to jail personnel. Wright's attorney then tried to claim that the arrest was a good faith mistake, that Wright genuinely believed Judge Taylor was impersonating a federal judge. This argument also crumbled when Martinez presented evidence showing that Wright had access to multiple databases that would have immediately confirmed her identity. But Martinez wasn't satisfied with just proving Wright's guilt. She wanted to expose the entire corrupt system that had allowed him to operate with impunity for years. During discovery, she uncovered internal emails showing that supervisors were aware of complaints against Wright but had chosen to ignore them. One particularly damaging email from Wright's sergeant read, "Wright knows how to handle the troublemakers in our district. Sometimes you have to show these people who's in charge." Another email from a lieutenant discussed reassigning Wright to areas with more activity, which was code for neighborhoods with higher black populations. The police department's own training records showed that Wright had received multiple reprimands for excessive force and improper arrest procedures, but had never faced serious discipline. His personnel file contained 19 citizen complaints, all dismissed without proper investigation. Martinez also discovered that the department had an unofficial quota system that rewarded officers for arrests in certain neighborhoods. Wright had consistently led the department in arrests, earning him praise from supervisors who cared more about statistics than constitutional rights. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became a media sensation. Every day, the courthouse was packed with reporters, civil rights activists, and community members who wanted to see justice served. Judge Taylor testified for 2 full days, describing in detail how Wright had violated her rights and humiliated her in public. Her testimony was devastating. Speaking in the same measured tone she used from the bench, she methodically described each illegal action Wright had taken. She explained how his behavior had violated the 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. She detailed the emotional trauma of being handcuffed and jailed like a common criminal despite having committed no crime. But perhaps most powerful was when she described the broader implications of Wright's actions. She explained how his behavior undermined public trust in law enforcement and made it harder for other officers to do their jobs effectively. She talked about how his actions sent a message to the Black community that success and education offered no protection from police harassment. Wright took the stand in his own defense, and it was a complete disaster. Under Martinez's cross-examination, he contradicted himself repeatedly. He couldn't explain why he had stopped Judge Taylor in the first place. He couldn't justify why he had searched her belongings without consent. He couldn't provide any evidence to support the charges he had filed against her. When Martinez asked him about his pattern of targeting Black professionals, Wright became defensive and angry. He denied being racist while simultaneously making comments that revealed his true beliefs about Black people who had achieved success. The most damaging moment came when Martinez played a recording from Wright's own body camera during a previous arrest. In the recording, Wright could be heard saying, "These people think their fancy degrees make them better than us. I'll show them who really has the power." Wright's face went pale as the recording played. His attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard Wright's own words revealing his motivations for targeting successful Black citizens. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of racial profiling and police misconduct. Dr. Angela Foster, a leading researcher on police bias, explained how Wright's actions fit the classic pattern of officers who use their badge to maintain racial hierarchies. A former police chief from another city testified about proper traffic stop procedures and explained how every single action Wright had taken violated basic police training and constitutional law. He called Wright's conduct the worst example of police misconduct he had seen in 30 years of law enforcement. The city's legal team tried desperately to limit their liability. They argued that Wright was a rogue officer acting outside his training and that the city shouldn't be held responsible for his individual actions. This defense strategy backfired when Martinez presented evidence showing that the city had been aware of Wright's pattern of misconduct but had failed to take corrective action. Internal affairs records showed that the department had received dozens of complaints about Wright's behavior but had systematically dismissed them without proper investigation. Supervisors had received reports about his inappropriate comments, but had taken no disciplinary action. The city's own policies required officers to report misconduct by their colleagues, but multiple officers testified that they had been discouraged from filing reports against Wright. Some said they feared retaliation from supervisors who protected Wright because of his high arrest numbers. Martinez also presented evidence showing that the city had paid out settlements in several previous cases involving Wright, but had never investigated whether there was a pattern of misconduct. The city had essentially been paying to cover up Wright's crimes while allowing him to continue victimizing citizens. During closing arguments, Martinez delivered a speech that brought several jury members to tears. She talked about how Wright had weaponized his badge to terrorize law-abiding citizens based solely on their race. She explained how his actions represented everything wrong with policing in America and why substantial damages were necessary to prevent similar misconduct in the future. Wright's attorney made a half-hearted argument about the dangers police officers face and asked for understanding. But after weeks of evidence showing Wright's systematic abuse of power, the plea fell flat. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning their verdict. They found Wright liable for violating Judge Taylor's constitutional rights under color of law. They found his supervisor liable for failing to properly train and supervise him. They found the police chief liable for maintaining policies that enabled racial profiling. And they found the city liable for creating and maintaining a culture of discrimination. Then came the damages award that shocked everyone in the courtroom. The jury awarded Judge Taylor $6 million in total damages, $2 million in compensatory damages for her pain, suffering, and emotional distress, $4 million in punitive damages designed to punish the defendants and deter future misconduct. The courtroom erupted in cheers from community members who had packed the gallery. Judge Taylor remained stoic, but those who knew her could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Justice had been served, but the consequences for Wright and the police department were just beginning. The $6 million verdict sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the state. Police chiefs began reviewing their own department's practices, terrified that they might be harboring their own version of Wright. Training programs were hastily implemented, and complaint procedures were overhauled. But for Wright personally, the financial judgment was just the beginning of his downfall. The FBI's criminal investigation was still ongoing, and federal prosecutors were considering charges for violating Judge Taylor's civil rights under color of law. If convicted, Wright faced up to 10 years in federal prison. The criminal charges came down exactly 6 weeks after the civil verdict. Federal prosecutors had spent months building their case, and when they finally filed charges against Wright, the indictment was devastating. Deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Each count carried serious prison time. Wright's world collapsed overnight. His police pension was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. His wife filed for divorce, taking their 2 children and moving across the country to live with her parents. His house went into foreclosure when he couldn't make the mortgage payments without his police salary. The media attention was relentless. Wright's mugshot appeared on every news outlet in the country. His name became synonymous with police corruption and racial bias. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse during his arraignment, demanding maximum sentences for all involved. But Wright wasn't the only one facing consequences. His supervisor, Sergeant David Walsh, was also indicted for conspiracy and willful blindness to civil rights violations. Prosecutors argued that Walsh had knowingly ignored complaints against Wright and had actually encouraged his discriminatory behavior through reassignments and positive evaluations. Police Chief Robert Martinez faced federal civil rights charges as well. The investigation revealed that he had received detailed reports about Wright's pattern of misconduct, but had buried them to protect the department's image. Emails showed that Martinez had been more concerned about negative publicity than constitutional violations. The trial of the 3 defendants became a national spectacle. Legal experts called it one of the most significant police misconduct cases in decades. Civil rights organizations sent representatives to observe every day of proceedings. The courthouse required additional security to handle the crowds of protesters and media personnel. Wright's federal trial revealed even more disturbing details about his behavior. Prosecutors presented evidence that he had planted drugs on at least 3 black suspects to justify arrests. Body camera footage showed him dropping small bags of marijuana during searches, then discovering them moments later. Dr. Jennifer Hassan, a prominent psychiatrist, testified about how Wright had destroyed her reputation in the medical community by arresting her on fabricated drug possession charges. She had spent $50,000 on legal fees to clear her name, but the arrest had already cost her hospital privileges and several lucrative consulting contracts. The prosecution also revealed that Wright had been selling information about pending arrests to criminal organizations. He would tip off drug dealers about planned raids in exchange for cash payments. This corruption went far beyond racial bias into outright criminality. Wright's attorney tried to portray him as a dedicated officer who had made mistakes under pressure. This defense strategy crumbled when prosecutors played recordings of Wright bragging about his arrests to other officers. In one particularly damaging recording, Wright described how he enjoyed watching uppity professionals squirm when he put them in handcuffs. The jury heard testimony from a former police informant who described how Wright had forced him to make false statements against black suspects. The informant, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, detailed a systematic scheme to fabricate evidence and manufacture probable cause for arrests. Expert witnesses explained how Wright's actions violated every principle of constitutional policing. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a criminology professor, testified that Wright's behavior represented the worst aspects of police culture and demonstrated how unchecked power could corrupt even those sworn to protect and serve. The defense called character witnesses who described Wright as a family man and community volunteer, but their testimony rang hollow after weeks of evidence showing his systematic abuse of power. Several character witnesses actually damaged Wright's case when they admitted under cross-examination that they had never witnessed his police work firsthand. Sergeant Walsh's trial revealed how supervisory failures had enabled Wright's reign of terror. Internal Affairs investigators testified that Walsh had received detailed complaints about Wright's conduct, but had dismissed them without proper investigation. Walsh had even coached Wright on how to write reports that would justify questionable arrests. The prosecution presented evidence that Walsh had actively participated in the conspiracy to violate citizens' civil rights. He had reassigned Wright to areas with higher black populations, specifically to increase arrest numbers. He had praised Wright's aggressive tactics in performance evaluations while ignoring obvious signs of misconduct. Walsh's attorney argued that he was simply following orders from higher-ranking officials who demanded increased arrest statistics. But prosecutors showed that Walsh had gone beyond mere compliance to actively facilitate Wright's discriminatory practices. Police Chief Martinez faced the most serious charges because of his position of authority. The prosecution argued that he had created and maintained a culture that not only tolerated racial bias, but actively rewarded it. Martinez had promoted officers based on arrest numbers without regard to constitutional compliance or citizen complaints. The evidence against Martinez included emails where he discussed the need to maintain order in certain neighborhoods through aggressive policing tactics. He had repeatedly ignored recommendations from internal affairs investigators to discipline Wright and other problem officers. Martinez's trial revealed systemic corruption throughout the entire police department. Federal investigators had discovered that racial bias training had been eliminated from the academy curriculum under his leadership. Complaint investigation procedures had been deliberately weakened to protect officers from accountability. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for all 3 defendants. Wright was convicted of 8 felony charges related to civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and corruption. Walsh was convicted of conspiracy and willful blindness charges. Martinez was convicted of the most serious charges related to maintaining a criminal conspiracy within the police department. Sentencing day arrived on a cold December morning, exactly 18 months after Wright had first spotted Judge Taylor driving through downtown. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating set up in adjacent rooms with video feeds. Wright was sentenced first. Federal Judge Robert Chen, who had reviewed thousands of pages of evidence and victim impact statements, delivered a scathing assessment of Wright's crimes. He called Wright's behavior a cancer on the institution of law enforcement, and noted that his actions had undermined public trust in police nationwide. Wright received 15 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He would be required to pay restitution to all identified victims of his misconduct. His police certification was permanently revoked, and he was banned from ever working in law enforcement again. The moment the sentence was announced, Wright's legs gave out and he collapsed in his chair. His attorney had to physically support him as the judge continued reading the terms of his punishment. Wright would be 62 years old when he was released from prison, assuming he served his full sentence. Sergeant Walsh received 8 years in federal prison for his role in enabling Wright's crimes. The judge noted that supervisors have a special responsibility to prevent misconduct, and that Walsh had failed spectacularly in that duty. His pension was forfeited, and he was ordered to pay substantial restitution to victims. Police Chief Martinez received the harshest sentence of 12 years in federal prison. Judge Chen explained that leadership positions come with the highest levels of responsibility and accountability. Martinez's failure to address known problems had enabled years of civil rights violations affecting hundreds of citizens. The sentences sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. Police chiefs began implementing immediate reforms to complaint investigation procedures and bias training programs. The fear of federal prosecution for civil rights violations became a powerful motivator for departments to address misconduct seriously, but the consequences extended far beyond the 3 defendants. The entire police department was placed under federal oversight through a consent decree that would last at least 10 years. Every policy, training program, and disciplinary procedure would be subject to federal approval and monitoring. The city was forced to pay an additional $42 million in settlements to other victims of rights misconduct who came forward after the initial verdict. These settlements included doctors, lawyers, teachers, business owners, and other professionals who had been targeted solely because of their race and success. Judge Taylor used the media attention to advocate for broader police reform. She testified before Congress about the need for federal legislation to address systemic bias in law enforcement. Her powerful testimony, delivered in the same measured tone she had used during her own trial, helped build momentum for significant policy changes. The police academy was completely restructured under federal oversight. New recruits were required to complete extensive bias training and community engagement programs. Veteran officers had to undergo retraining or face termination. The culture of the department began to slowly change as problem officers were weeded out and replaced with community-oriented professionals. Wright's former colleagues distanced themselves from him as quickly as possible. Officers who had once laughed at his inappropriate jokes now claimed they had always been uncomfortable with his behavior. The blue wall of silence that had protected him for years crumbled as officers faced federal scrutiny of their own actions. The case became a landmark precedent for civil rights litigation against police departments. Law schools began teaching Judge Taylor versus Wright as an example of how individual misconduct could expose systemic problems and result in massive liability for municipalities. Wright's family paid a heavy price for his crimes. His children faced harassment at school and had to change their names to escape the stigma. His ex-wife struggled to find employment because of her association with his case. The ripple effects of his actions destroyed multiple families beyond just his victims. From his federal prison cell, Wright watched as his former department underwent complete transformation. New leadership, new policies, new training, and new accountability measures were implemented. The culture he had thrived in was systematically dismantled and replaced with genuine community policing principles. The FBI's investigation expanded to other police departments after discovering that Wright's misconduct was part of a broader pattern of civil rights violations across multiple jurisdictions. Federal prosecutors opened investigations in 6 other cities, leading to additional indictments and consent decrees. Judge Taylor returned to her federal bench with enhanced credibility and moral authority. Her experience as a victim of police misconduct gave her unique insight into the intersection of law enforcement and civil rights. She began writing influential opinions that strengthened protections for citizens against police abuse. The case also led to legislative changes at the state level. Lawmakers passed bills requiring independent investigation of police misconduct complaints and creating civilian oversight boards with real authority to discipline officers. Police unions fought these changes but lacked public support after the Wright scandal. Community trust in law enforcement, which had been severely damaged by Wright's actions, began to slowly rebuild under new leadership. Town halls, community policing initiatives, and transparency measures helped bridge the gap between police and the citizens they were supposed to serve. But for Wright, sitting in his prison cell wearing federal inmate clothing instead of a police uniform, there was no redemption story. He had thrown away his career, his freedom, his family, and his reputation for the temporary satisfaction of humiliating successful black citizens. The power he had abused so callously was gone forever. replaced by the powerlessness of incarceration. His appeals were denied at every level. Federal judges found no merit in his claims of prosecutorial overreach or excessive sentencing. The evidence of his crimes was simply too overwhelming, the pattern of misconduct too clear, and the harm to his victims too severe to justify any reduction in punishment. The story of Wright's downfall became required reading at police academies nationwide as an example of how quickly a career in law enforcement could be destroyed by racism and corruption. New recruits learned about constitutional policing not just as legal theory, but as practical necessity for avoiding federal prosecution. Years later, as Wright remained locked away in federal prison, Judge Taylor continued to serve on the federal bench with distinction. She had transformed her traumatic experience into a force for positive change that would protect countless future victims from experiencing what she had endured that Tuesday afternoon. The intersection where Wright had first spotted Judge Taylor driving became a symbol of how one moment of decision could change multiple lives forever. His choice to target her because of her race and apparent success had seemed like just another routine harassment to him. Instead, it became the beginning of the end for everything he thought he had built. Wright's choice to pull over Judge Taylor that Tuesday afternoon cost him everything. His 15-year prison sentence, his destroyed family, his lost pension, and his permanent disgrace all stemmed from a single moment when he decided that a successful black woman needed to be put in her place. He had wielded his badge like a weapon for years, terrorizing innocent citizens while his department looked the other way. Judge Taylor's $6 million victory sent a clear message that accountability would come for officers who abused their power. Her courage to fight back exposed an entire system of corruption and changed how police misconduct is investigated and prosecuted nationwide. Wright learned too late that in the age of smartphones and federal oversight, racism comes with consequences that some people simply cannot afford to pay. The blue lights that flashed in Judge Taylor's rearview mirror that day didn't just signal a traffic stop. They marked the beginning of the end for a corrupt cop who thought he was untouchable. Justice was served, but the work of rebuilding trust between communities and law enforcement continues every single day. This case was intense, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.